Ever since I published my review on Toradora 7 years ago? Jesus. I would often get comments from people recommending other romantic comedies or romances that they think are better than Toradora. I actually liked getting them because it served as a convenient source of recommendations for me to check out. Yet, out of the ones I had seen and the ones I had checked out, none managed to dethrone Toradora in my view. Then, one day, I was browsing for manga to read and stumbled across one that had pretty great ratings and viewership yet had never heard of, called Bloom Into You. I decided to give it a shot. And finally, Toradora had an actual contender to deal with. Honestly, it was so difficult to decide which one I liked more that I decided to have them both share the throne. It sort of works since Toradora is a romantic comedy while Bloom Into You is more of a pure romance. Additionally, most people will probably consume Toradora in its anime form, while Bloom Into You will be, and as of now only fully can be, consumed as a manga. Great, I thought to myself. Even if it isn't replacing Toradora, at least I have another series I can show off to people and tell them how great it is. And that's when I ran into a problem. You see, Bloom Into You is a very introspective story that ultimately has characters divulge their inner struggles to each other or themselves in their own heads at some point or another. What that means is that a lot of the aspects of the story that are praiseworthy are things that the manga brings up on its own. Any review or analysis I could do for it would end up with me largely just parroting stuff that the manga itself already goes over. There are some things I could cover, sure, just not enough to make a worthwhile review or analysis. This might be a decision I could revisit down the line, but at least for now, I wouldn't be satisfied with anything I could put out. I decided it would just be a series I'd mention to people if the opportunity arose, and left it at that. Then, something I didn't anticipate happened. A few days later, I got recommended a collab video between the Anime Man, Emirichu, and Daitis where they went over the 30 most popular romances and put them in a tier chart. I was both happy and unsurprised to see Toradora made the cut, but then shocked to see Bloom Into You had not, especially compared to some of the other series that did make the cut. That's when I remembered that despite multiple websites showing Bloom Into You having great ratings and solid readership, nobody had recommended the manga to me. I had simply stumbled across it. The purpose of this long-winded intro is to explain that I was given both an idea of how to make something about Bloom Into You and a specific reason to do so. I want to help boost the series' popularity and awareness to the point that whenever the top romances of anime and manga are discussed by people, Bloom Into You is a part of that conversation. To that end, rather than make a review or analysis, I decided to make a recommendation-style video instead. One last thing before we get started, this will be spoiler-free with the exception of going over the first chapter, because honestly trying to give a decent synopsis of the story without covering it is basically an exercise in futility, so I may as well just use it as a basis. Also, while I'll be using images from the first chapter, they'll be in a random order, and I've left out some of the more important and personal favorite pages. One praise I can already mention is that the mangaka Nakatani Nio frequently surprised me at how good she was with visual storytelling and symbolism in her artwork, so I'd rather you get to experience it yourself when reading the manga rather than get it spoiled here. Alright, so let's answer the first question. What is Bloom Into You? Bloom Into You is the story of Koito Yu, a girl who's infatuated with the concept of love that she reads in romance stories and hears in love songs, yet has never actually managed to experience that kind of love for herself. She's now started her first year of high school, and having her friends around her talk about their love interests, and even love in general, makes her feel like she's a complete outsider. On her way to check out and possibly join the student council, she accidentally stumbles across one of the members, Nanami Toko, being confessed to. Initially slightly envious of the scene, Yu's interest is piqued when she hears Toko reject him with the reasoning that there isn't necessarily anything wrong with him, she just doesn't intend on dating anybody, no matter who they are. Later on, with some gentle prodding, Yu asks her why she isn't interested in dating anybody, and Toko reveals that despite quite a few people telling her they love her, she's never felt anything in response. Feeling like she may have found a kindred spirit, Yu later asks Toko for help. When she graduated from middle school, Yu had a friend who confessed that he was in love with her, but like Toko, she felt nothing in return. She asked for him to wait for an answer and decided that now was the time. Rather than asking if she should date him or not, however, she asks Toko for assistance in rejecting him, since she has more experience doing so in their shared circumstance. Once he calls, Yu starts to get nervous, and Toko grabs her hand and reassures her that she'll be fine and should just be honest with him. After she rejects him and there end up being no hard feelings between them, Yu turns to Toko and realizes that she's still holding her hand. Toko asks if what Yu said about probably never being able to feel like anyone would be special to her was true. When Yu affirms that it's likely nobody would, Toko pulls her in close. An extremely confused Yu tries to get Toko to confirm that they're the same in their inability to love anyone, but Toko tells her that she thinks she could fall in love with Yu. Thus begins the relationship between Toko, who thinks she's finally found someone she can love, and Yu, who still can't manage to, no matter how much she wants to. Some people might hear the end of that synopsis and think, it sure is convenient that Yu is the one Toko feels she may have a romantic attraction to, which, yes, that's because it's the premise for the story. However, more importantly, there actually is a reason that Toko starts feeling an attraction to Yu. You're only fed small hints as you read through chapters, then they add up into a reveal that puts the reason for their bond into a surprising and interesting context. Since I can't spoil anything in this, the best I can say is that while Yu and Toko both say in the first chapter that they don't feel like they'll ever be able to love someone else, the reasons for why they think that way come from very different places. While I was already enjoying the manga up to that point, the reveal and true understanding of the dynamic happening between Yu and Toko was what sunk its claws into me. This gets fleshed out and explored and leads to the both of them more deeply understanding each other as well as themselves. For those who've watched quite a few of my videos, romantic relationships or feelings being used as a growth tool for characters to understand who they are as people seems to be a theme I'm particularly fond of. Moreover, it doesn't fall into the trap that a lot of other romances fall into where misunderstandings happen. Usually stories do this to stretch the runtime or because the writer has no better ideas, but they almost always leave a bad taste in people's mouths and just feel like filler. Now, if someone who has read Bloom Into You is watching this, you might be thinking, wait, but wasn't there a misunderstanding in a chapter around the mid-30s or so? Which, yes, there was one, but here's the thing. It's not actually the main dilemma at play. Again, this is difficult to explain without spoilers, but essentially the misunderstanding is a symptom of a larger, deeper issue at play. The story proves that this is the case by having the one who caused the misunderstanding realize pretty quickly that they probably caused one, but sees it as pointless to correct. Essentially, fixing the misunderstanding won't actually fix the problem. There are more complicated issues at play here. By the way, the only characters I've mentioned so far are Yu and Toko, but there are also a ton of great side characters that help to further the story and its themes. A lot of stories fall into the trap of creating side characters whose only purpose is to add something thematically or force a certain plot development. But Bloom Into You's side characters are all interesting people with their own dilemmas or worries that fit seamlessly into the story. It's actually pretty remarkable to see how interwoven everyone's troubles and growth are. I think part of the reason the characters and story feel so polished and well executed is because Bloom Into You was a monthly manga. I've noticed that I tend to favor those over their weekly counterparts, although it's obviously not a black and white scenario. The reason is probably that monthly manga have a larger page count to work with. Weekly manga usually have around 20 pages, while monthly manga tend to be in the high 30s. This higher page count allows the mangaka to use as much time as they need to address whatever the focus of the chapter is. This page count is also decently malleable, with some chapters entering the 40s and one chapter I remember being about 10 pages. Some ideas need more time to play out or more scenes, and others can be succinct and not need any extra fluff to bloat the length. I only briefly mentioned it at the beginning, but I also want to quickly say a couple things about the anime adaptation, even if it is one season that's only adapted half the story. I should also mention, in full disclosure, that I have not finished watching all of it, though I only wanted to talk about what I saw in the first episode anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem unless the adaptation dramatically changes in the last few episodes for whatever reason. Since Bloom Into You is a story about romance with not enough comedy to be labeled as a romantic comedy, I was worried that an anime adaptation would be, well, boring to watch. In a story mainly consisting of characters talking to each other or thinking inside their heads, there's not exactly much happening on the screen. This isn't much of a problem in manga since you can use a single image to have potentially multiple lines of dialogue. But in anime, you have multiple frames playing in a sequence, and if nothing is moving in them, it can lead to viewers getting bored, no matter what's being said. Thankfully, it seems a talented director over at Troika that actually likes the source material was put in charge, because it really shows. Kato Makoto transferred pretty much all of the clever visual storytelling and symbolism from the manga into the adaptation, and there's even some really nice animation cuts that are unique as well. However, this is a double-edged sword. While I liked nearly all of the nice attention to the visuals, I had an issue with one of them in particular. When you first sees Toko, there's a really nice sequence of visuals to reveal her. Obviously, this was done because Toko is the other main character of the story, so she needs a slightly dramatic entrance. The problem is that in the manga, Yu is first drawn to Toko when she hears her say that she doesn't intend to go out with anyone, obviously due to their potential similarities she sees. In the anime, however, the visuals showing Yu being entranced by Toko happen right before she says that line. Due to that, it's very easy to misinterpret the scene as a love at first sight scenario, which, given Yu's character, is a pretty big misunderstanding for a new viewer to have. They would probably get the idea a bit later, but it doesn't change the fact the scene should have happened after Toko's line rather than before. But you know, so far a lot of this recommendation has come across as, it's good, just trust me, which, to be fair, is kind of the nature of recommendations. So let me change my approach up a little bit here at the end to see if this works better. Something I often say is that the difference between the general audience and a critic is that the critic enjoys something based on how well it achieves what it's trying to do, while the general audience enjoys something based on what it literally does. This is by no means a perfect comparison, but I think there's at least a grain of truth to it. The general audience doesn't necessarily like Toradora so much because it's a well-told story. It's because it's about teenagers trying to understand what love is, something that's incredibly relatable to people. Being a well-told story certainly helps, but it's not the main draw. Bloom Into You is, in my opinion, a story that's just as well told as Toradora, but more importantly, it's about something just as relatable. While there's certainly lots of pondering over romance, the theme is more than that. Bloom Into You is a story about the choices we make and what that says about who we are. You can even take it a bit further and say it's about the feedback loop between how our choices define us and how who we are manifests itself into the choices that we make. This story is full of characters making both needed and voluntary choices of various kinds, and they ultimately have a dramatic impact on themselves and those around them. Having to make difficult choices, especially ones that involve other people, is something I imagine is relatable to almost everyone. If my theory about why the general audience consumes and enjoys media is even partially right, then hopefully even if my previous phrases didn't mean much to you, then knowing this will sell you on the series. I'm not naive enough to believe that absolutely everyone will like Bloom Into You, even if I'm personally confident in how great it is. Yet if I can introduce new people that end up loving it, then those people can spread the word and reach others that will also love it. And hopefully, my goal of Bloom Into You being a common part of conversations of romance stories like how Toradora is will be achieved. It'll definitely be a part of mine.